It was 2:13 a.m. when Emma's phone rang. The sudden shrill sound cut through the quiet, darkened room, piercing the silence like a thunderclap. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had been lying in bed, tossing and turning for hours, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quiet. The last few weeks had been a blur, a series of events she hadn't fully processed. An accident, a company scandal, and the end of her career as she'd known it. It was all too much. But now, a phone call in the middle of the night? With a groan, she reached for the phone. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, no name, just a string of digits. Her thumb hovered over the answer button, a mixture of fear and curiosity welling up inside her. Who would call me at this hour, she muttered to herself, but something inside her knew she couldn't ignore it. She answered. The voice on the other end was muffled, distant, almost distorted by static. But it was unmistakably male, deep and urgent. "Get to the office," the voice said, flat and emotionless. There was no introduction, no greeting. Just that cold, demanding message. "Who is this?" Emma's voice trembled, but she was already sitting up in bed, heart pounding. The room felt too quiet, the weight of the moment suffocating. But the voice didn't answer. It just repeated, "Get to the office." Then the line went dead. Emma stared at the screen, the faint buzzing of the dead call ringing in her ears. It took her a few moments to process what had just happened. A strange, unsettling feeling crawled under her skin. She didn't work at the office anymore. Not since the accident. Not since everything changed. For weeks, she'd been in a state of limbo, recovering, disconnected from everything she'd once known. But the voice, it was familiar. She couldn't place it, but something about it made her blood run cold. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand, 2:15 a.m. The storm outside was raging, the wind howling against the windows. But even in the midst of that storm, something deep inside her told her she couldn't ignore the call. Something was pulling her back. She needed to go, even if it didn't make sense. Her heart raced as she swung her legs out of bed. She hadn't been to the office in weeks. Not since she'd walked away from it all. But now, this call, this cryptic message, had dragged her back into the very place she thought she'd left behind. Throwing on a jacket, she grabbed her keys from the dresser. Every step felt heavier, as if the universe itself was warning her not to go. But she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't walk away from whatever it was that was waiting for her at the office. The car ride was tense, the silence broken only by the sound of the rain tapping against the windshield and the occasional gust of wind. Emma's thoughts were racing. What had the man meant by, "Get to the office"? Why now? Why hadn't he identified himself? And why? After everything that had happened, was she being dragged back into the very place she thought she'd escaped? As she drove, the rain began to pour harder, the streets slick and dark. Her headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, and for a moment, she felt utterly alone. The office loomed ahead, its lights dim, casting an eerie glow against the night sky. It was almost as if the building was waiting for her, anticipating her arrival. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She parked in the lot, her hands trembling as she turned off the engine. The office building stood before her like a ghost, its cold, steel frame reflecting the glow of the streetlights. Emma hesitated for a moment, staring up at the entrance. There was no sign of life. No security guard at the front desk. No cars in the parking lot. The place felt abandoned. But the note, she remembered the note she had found earlier, the one that had arrived at her apartment just a few days ago. They don't know who you are. They never did. Who had left it? And what did it mean? Emma stood frozen for a moment, unsure if she should step out of the car. Her instincts told her to turn around, to leave before she got dragged deeper into whatever mess she had been pulled back into. But the voice, the mystery, and that cryptic note, they were like an itch she couldn't scratch. She had to know. She had to find out what was going on. Stepping out of the car, the chill of the rain hit her skin. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, the wind whipping her hair around her face as she walked toward the building. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she pressed on. Something was waiting for her inside. She could feel it. The office building was eerily quiet, its glass doors reflecting the dim lights of the parking lot behind her. Emma pulled the door open, the faint squeak of the hinges echoing in the stillness. She stepped inside, the cold air of the hallway hitting her like a slap in the face. The lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows on the walls. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound. Her footsteps echoed as she walked down the hallway, each step feeling like an eternity. Her old office was at the end of the hall, the very office where it had all started, where everything had changed. As she reached the door, Emma felt her pulse quicken. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. What was she going to find inside? Who had left the note? Who had made the phone call? With a deep breath, she turned the handle and stepped inside. Her office looked just as it had the last time she was there, papers scattered across her desk, a few old coffee cups left behind. But something was off. The atmosphere felt different. Heavy. The silence was almost suffocating. And then, she saw it. A note on her desk. It was folded neatly, placed right in the center of the chaos. Emma's fingers trembled as she reached for it, unfolding the paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words were clear. They don't know who you are. They never did. Her stomach churned. The same words as the note at her apartment. What did they mean? Who was they? And why hadn't anyone ever told her the truth? She stared at the note for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. But before she could process anything, the sound of a door slamming shut behind her made her jump. Her heart skipped a beat. Whipping around, Emma saw a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, his features shadowed by the dim light. His face was partially obscured, but there was something about him, something she couldn't place. He looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't figure out why. Who are you? Emma's voice trembled, her eyes wide with fear. The man didn't speak right away. Instead, he took a step closer, a strange, knowing smile curling on his lips. It was as if he knew exactly what was going through her mind, but he wasn't ready to share. I think it's time you found out the truth, he said, his voice calm but carrying an underlying tension that made Emma's heart race. He stepped forward, and the door clicked shut behind him with a chilling finality. Emma took a step back, her mind racing. What truth? What was he talking about? And why now, after all this time? Before she could react, the lights in the room flickered once, then went out, plunging her into total darkness. Emma's breath hitched in her chest as she fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. But the screen remained black, nothing. The room was completely silent. She was alone in the dark, and she didn't know who to trust. But one thing was certain, she was about to find out something that would change everything. The darkness swallowed her whole. Emma's breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, the cold sweat on her skin making her feel slick and exposed. The man, the mysterious figure who had appeared in her office, was still there, or at least she thought he was. She couldn't see him anymore, not with the lights out and the heavy silence that now weighed down on her. The only sound was the frantic thrum of her own heartbeat, ringing in her ears. For a moment, she stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Her phone was dead, and the flickering of the lights seemed like a warning she wasn't ready to interpret. She cursed under her breath, fighting to regain some sense of control over the situation. She had always prided herself on being a problem solver, someone who kept a level head even in the most stressful situations. But now? She was lost. She could hear faint footsteps, and her senses heightened. Was he coming closer? The man she'd seen moments ago? Or was it someone else entirely? Was it a trap? Hello? Emma called into the darkness, her voice trembling more than she had intended. She cursed herself again. Fear wasn't an option. She had to act. If she didn't, she would never get out of here, and she'd never uncover the truth behind this mess. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the office, sending a fresh wave of panic through her chest. Emma felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise, the sound of that laugh vibrating through her bones. She didn't know who or what it was, but it felt wrong, unnatural. The voice was cold, almost rehearsed. "Who's there?" she demanded, though her voice faltered in the face of the unknown. "Don't you remember me?" the voice responded, low and cryptic, like it was mocking her. It didn't sound like the man she had seen earlier. It was different. It was a voice she knew. But why didn't she remember it? Emma's hands gripped the edge of her desk, steadying herself as the words echoed in her mind. "Don't you remember me?" She didn't want to admit it, but the voice sounded too familiar. It clawed at the edges of her memory, like something just out of reach. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized. She should know who this was. But why couldn't she place it? The room seemed to close in on her as she tried to piece it together. Her mind flashed back to everything that had happened before the crash, before her life was turned upside down. Her career, the office drama, the secret meetings, the whispers in the hallways. It all started to bleed together in a blur, a string of disconnected moments. But now, standing in the dark, she felt as though she was a part of a much bigger story, a story that had been written long before she had ever walked into this office. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, blinding her for a moment. She squinted, trying to adjust, and then, there he was. The man. The one who had been waiting for her. He was standing across from her desk, just as tall as before, his features now fully illuminated in the harsh, sterile light of the office. But something had changed. His face was familiar, eerily familiar, and for the first time, Emma's mind clicked. She recognized him. It was Jake. Jake. Her heart nearly stopped. Jake, the man she had once trusted, the man who had been her partner in the business, in life. But that was before everything fell apart. Her mind was racing now. What was he doing here? And why was he talking to her like that? The last time they'd spoken had been years ago, after everything had gone to hell. The company had crumbled, their partnership had dissolved, and they had gone their separate ways. He had disappeared without a trace, and Emma had never heard from him again. And now, he was standing in front of her, in the office that had been hers, looking like a stranger with an unsettling smirk on his lips. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her, the smile never leaving his face. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes, dark and cold, were empty, like he was seeing right through her. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Jake's voice was tinged with bitterness, but there was something else there too. A strange familiarity mixed with something darker. Something Emma couldn't quite place. I don't understand," Emma stammered, stepping back, her brain struggling to catch up with the flood of emotions crashing over her. "Why are you here? What do you want?" Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the desk toward her, and Emma instinctively picked it up. The paper was thick, heavy in her hands. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling, and pulled out a series of documents. They were all marked with the same logo, the company logo, but there was something off about them. The words on the pages made her stomach twist. The documents were all dated after her departure from the company. They were financial reports, employee lists, and legal documents. Things she never thought she would see again. But then her eyes landed on one particular document. Her breath hitched. It was a company ownership transfer document. She stared at it, disbelief growing with every passing second. This wasn't just any document. This was a contract, a legal agreement that transferred the ownership of the company to her. To Emma. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. She had never seen this document before. She had never signed it. She had never agreed to anything like this. But the more she looked at it, the more certain she became. It was real. And it had been signed by someone she trusted. Someone who had kept a secret from her. She looked up at Jake, her voice barely a whisper. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Jake's expression didn't change. He was still watching her with that same unsettling smile. But his eyes told a different story. They were cold, calculating. Like he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Emma to realize the truth. You were never meant to know, Emma, Jake said, his voice low and final. You were never supposed to find out. The company had to be kept in the shadows, and you, well, you were just part of the plan. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of his words crashed over her. Part of the plan, she repeated, her mind spinning. What plan? What are you talking about? Jake finally took a step toward her, his gaze never wavering. You were never meant to be in charge. You were never meant to be the one running the show. You were just a pawn in a much larger game. Emma's head was spinning. The documents, the secret ownership transfer, the cryptic phone call, it was all starting to fall into place, but nothing made sense. What was Jake talking about? What had really happened to the company? You don't understand, do you? Jake continued, his voice growing colder. The company was never just about business. It was about power. Control. You were always meant to be the fall guy, the one who would take the blame when everything fell apart. Blame? What are you talking about? I left the company because of the crash. Emma felt the panic rising in her chest again, but she fought to hold it back. What does all of this mean? Jake smirked, shaking his head. You were never meant to leave, Emma. You were supposed to stay. But when you disappeared, things got complicated. And now, he trailed off, his smile growing wider. Now, it's time for you to take your place. You're the one who's been chosen. The one who will fix everything. Emma's mind reeled as the pieces finally started to click. But just as the truth seemed to break through the fog, everything went dark again. The lights flickered and then cut out, plunging her into another abyss of uncertainty. And this time, Emma realized, she wasn't just fighting to understand what had happened. She was fighting for her life. Emma had always believed in the saying, everything happens for a reason. But today, as she sat across from Jake in his private office, surrounded by the polished wood and sleek decor that spoke of his power, she wondered if that was ever true. Her heart raced as the weight of the situation settled over her like a dark cloud. Jake, the man she had trusted, the one she had admired for so long, had betrayed her. Her mind refused to accept it. She couldn't understand how everything had spiraled so quickly. How had he, someone she had worked so closely with, become a stranger? How had she missed the signs? I never meant for you to find out like this, Jake's voice broke through her thoughts, calm yet undeniably distant. Emma looked at him, trying to read his expression. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. The same posture he had always adopted when he was in control, but now it felt different. It was no longer the man she knew. It was a man hiding behind a mask. Then why didn't you just tell me, she demanded, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. Why did you let me believe all this was normal? Jake's face hardened slightly, but he quickly masked it with a smile that seemed rehearsed. Because you never asked, Emma. You were always so focused on your work. So focused on the company. You never saw what was happening behind the scenes. You never saw how everything was changing. The words stung more than she expected. She had always prided herself on being observant, sharp. But now, with the truth unfolding before her eyes, she felt betrayed. It was as if she had been a pawn in someone else's game the whole time. "But I trusted you," she whispered, barely able to keep the emotion from spilling over. "You were my mentor, Jake. You were supposed to guide me. Not do this." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I never wanted you to be a part of this." But when things started to change, when the company began to fall apart, I had to take drastic measures. It was for the greater good, Emma. She narrowed her eyes, trying to make sense of his words. For the greater good? You lied to me. You manipulated everything. And for what? To keep the company under your control? Jake's expression flickered for a moment, something darker lurking behind his eyes. But before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Emma tensed, instinctively feeling that something wasn't right. "Come in," Jake called out, his voice controlled. The door opened, and a man stepped inside, one Emma recognized, but only vaguely. He was tall, with a sharp suit that screamed of wealth and influence. His face was hard to read, but there was something about him that made Emma's skin crawl. She had seen him around the office before, but he had never been important enough to notice. "Jake, you wanted to see me," the man said, his voice smooth but carrying a subtle menace. "Yes," Jake replied, glancing at Emma before turning his attention back to the man. "This is Emma. She's been part of the team for a long time." The man's eyes flicked over to Emma, and she felt a chill crawl up her spine. "I see," he said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. "We need to talk. There's something you need to understand, Emma." "About what?" Emma's voice was sharp, demanding answers. The man's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "About the company. About what Jake has been hiding from you." Before Emma could respond, Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough, Frank," he snapped, his voice suddenly cold. "Leave." Frank didn't move. Instead, he met Jake's gaze with an unreadable expression. After a tense moment, he turned and walked out of the room without another word. Jake turned back to Emma, his demeanor shifting. "I told you, Emma, there are things going on here that you don't understand. I didn't want to drag you into this, but I had no choice. You're too important." "Too important for what?" Emma demanded, standing up now, her fists clenched at her sides. "For you to control me? For you to use me like a pawn? Control you?" Jake's voice was a low growl now. "I never wanted to control you. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to give you the chance to make a difference, Emma. But it was never meant to be like this." Emma shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "What are you talking about? You've lied to me, manipulated me. I don't know who you are anymore." Jake's eyes softened for a moment, as if the weight of his actions was finally sinking in. "I didn't want it to be like this," he whispered again, his voice cracking. "But the truth is, you're not just a part of this company. You're more important than that." Emma took a step back, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. "There's something you need to know about the company, something that I didn't tell you when you joined. It's not just about business. It's about power. And you've been at the center of it all along." Emma's mind raced. "What are you saying?" Jake looked at her with a strange intensity, his eyes filled with something unrecognizable. "You were chosen, Emma. Chosen for a reason. And now I need you to understand what's really at stake here. Her mind was spinning. Chosen? What did he mean by that? She didn't understand. None of this made sense. She had always worked hard, done her best, tried to help the company succeed. But this was something else entirely. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, and it terrified her. "I don't want to be part of whatever this is," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I don't care about the power or the secrets. I just want to go back to my life." Jake's eyes flickered with something close to regret, but it quickly disappeared. "It's too late for that. You're already in too deep, Emma. You always have been." Suddenly, the door to the office burst open, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah, the woman who had disappeared from the company years ago. The woman who had been part of the original team that founded the company with Jake. "Emma, you need to leave now," Sarah said, her voice urgent. Emma's gaze darted between Sarah and Jake. "What's going on? What is all of this?" Sarah looked at Jake, her expression hardening. "I'll explain everything later. But right now, you need to come with me. It's not safe here anymore." Before Emma could protest, Sarah grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Jake didn't move. He stood there, his face a mask of unreadable emotions. "Don't trust him, Emma," Sarah whispered, as she led her out of the office. As they rushed down the hallway, Emma's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. What was happening? Why had everything changed so suddenly? And what did Sarah know that Emma didn't? They reached the elevator, and Sarah pressed the button frantically. The doors opened, and they stepped inside. The moment the doors closed, Sarah turned to Emma, her face filled with urgency. "It's time you learned the truth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake isn't who you think he is. And neither is this company." The darkness felt different now. Emma's breath was slow, deliberate. The panic, the confusion, everything that had surged through her only moments ago, had settled into a heavy weight in her chest. She wasn't sure if the darkness she faced was external or internal, but she knew one thing: she was in control now. The shadows that once paralyzed her had started to lose their power over her. And she was going to find the truth. It had been days since she last saw Jake. He had disappeared just as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind only the haunting memory of his cryptic words. "You were never meant to know, Emma." The last of the shadows in her mind began to fade as the days passed. Emma couldn't just ignore the questions that still burned inside her. She had to act. She had to confront the truth, even if it meant walking into the unknown, facing a past that threatened to bury her alive. The door to the office creaked open, breaking her train of thought. Emma's body tensed instinctively. But it wasn't Jake. It wasn't anyone she recognized. The figure in the doorway was unfamiliar, their face obscured by the soft light from the hallway. She had only seen their silhouette in the dim light of the office. "Who are you?" Emma asked, her voice steady but her heart racing. The figure took a step inside. Slowly. Cautiously. "I'm here to help you, Emma," the voice was soft but firm. "I know what's been happening. I know about the company. About Jake. About everything." Emma narrowed her eyes. The words sounded too familiar, too rehearsed, but there was something genuine in the voice. Something Emma had come to trust in the midst of all the deceit and confusion. "I don't need anyone's help," Emma replied, her jaw tight. "Not after everything I've been through." The figure remained silent for a moment, then stepped into the full light, revealing a face she hadn't seen in years. A face she had thought she'd forgotten. "Sarah?" Emma's voice faltered as the name escaped her lips. "What are you doing here?" The woman standing before her was Sarah, a former colleague from her past. She had disappeared from Emma's life without a trace years ago, shortly before the company had fallen apart. Emma hadn't thought about her in ages. But now, here she was, looking as calm as ever. "I never thought I'd see you again," Emma whispered. "I never thought you'd need to," Sarah responded quietly. "But things have changed, Emma. Things are not what you think." Emma's mind raced. "What do you mean? What's going on with the company? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't have the chance," Sarah answered, her expression filled with sorrow. "Jake, he's been manipulating everything from the start. The company, the ownership transfer, even your disappearance. It was all part of a larger plan. And you were never supposed to be in the dark. He kept you there for a reason." Sarah paused, glancing down at the floor before looking back up at Emma. "I had to leave before it got too dangerous. But I couldn't stay away forever. Not when I knew what was at stake." "Dangerous?" Emma's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? You're talking about Jake, aren't you?" Sarah nodded, her face darkening. "He's been playing a much bigger game than you could ever imagine. It wasn't just about the company, it's about power. Control. And the lives of everyone who got too close to him." Emma stepped forward, trying to make sense of the words she was hearing. "What are you saying? That I'm part of something bigger? That I was always meant to be a part of this?" Sarah looked at Emma, her eyes filled with a mix of pity and understanding. "Not exactly. You were chosen. Jake made sure of that. But it wasn't just for business. He needed someone strong, someone who could handle the truth when it came to light. And he thought you would be the one. But when you left, everything got thrown off track." Emma took a deep breath, trying to absorb the weight of Sarah's words. "So, what happens now? Why are you here?" "I'm here to help you take control back," Sarah said, her tone fierce now. "Jake can't be allowed to keep manipulating you or anyone else. He has to pay for everything he's done." The last part hit Emma like a bolt of lightning. It was the first time she had heard anyone speak about Jake in such a way. The way Sarah spoke of him made Emma wonder if she truly understood the full extent of what had happened. What was going on? What was really happening behind the scenes? "I don't understand," Emma admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "What's his endgame? Why does he want to control everything?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully, then nodded, as if deciding that Emma was finally ready to hear the truth. "Jake's goal has always been power. He's always wanted to take control of everything he touches, to build something that no one could ever take from him. And the company? It was just the beginning. You and your role in it were never a part of the plan. But when things fell apart, when you disappeared, he was forced to step in and take over. But not just in the way you think." Emma felt a chill run through her as she realized what Sarah was implying. "He's been pulling strings. All along. But for what purpose?" Sarah hesitated, then finally spoke, her words like a final dagger in the air. "Jake was never just trying to own a company. He wanted to build a legacy, Emma. He wanted to change the world. But the way he was going about it, the lies, the manipulation. He was willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Including you." Emma's eyes widened. "Me? Why me?" "Because you were the one who almost stopped him. When you left, when you decided to take a step back from the company, you unknowingly derailed his plans. And he couldn't have that." The truth of Sarah's words hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud, thick and suffocating. Emma could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, but she refused to break down now. She couldn't. Not after everything she had endured. "I won't let him win," Emma whispered, more to herself than to Sarah. "I won't let him tear apart everything I've worked for. I'll fight him, no matter what it takes." Sarah smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Good. You're stronger than you think, Emma. And it's time the world saw that." As Emma looked at Sarah, a strange sense of resolve filled her. The pieces were finally falling into place. She had been in the dark for so long, but now she was stepping into the light. And she wasn't afraid anymore. It was time to take control back. To face Jake and everything he had done. And to expose the truth, no matter the cost. With one final, determined glance at Sarah, Emma turned and walked toward the door. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure, she wasn't going to let anyone control her life any longer. The truth was hers to own. And it was time to take back what was rightfully hers.